Football season is here, and it's time to bet with my bookie. Use promo code Gators and get a free $20 wager with your first deposit. Your winning season begins today, only at my bookie.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And here we are. We get to finally preview a game. We know it's game week. If you listen to the last episode of Gators Breakdown, you know how excited Will and I were for that. But here we are. We finally get a full preview for an opponent now coming up for the 2020 season. And, of course, that is the Ole Miss Rebels. So joining me to preview the Rebels is Jake Evans from the Rebel Walk. So we'll get a in-depth preview of Lane Kiffin and the new look Ole Miss Rebels from him. And I tell you what, just an exciting game just because of all the questions kind of surrounding that program with the coaching change there with Lane Kiffin coming in. Kind of right now a Gators Breakdown announcement. Every Sunday, a day after a game is played, we do a big game recap, game review style of show. Will Salmon from The Athletic was joining me last year to do that. Well, this year, we'll do it with two other people. And so excited to bring on Nick De La Torre from Gator Country and Graham Hall from the Gainesville Sun would join me every Sunday to look back at the previous day's game. So, of course, this Sunday we'll look back. Nick will be traveling to Oxford for the Ole Miss game. So we're going to try and record around 1 p.m. On Sunday. That will be live on YouTube, and then the podcast version will be available later. So look out around midday on Sunday. We'll try and get it for 1 o'clock. Nick's traveling back. That's the scheduled time we're going to do it right now. But so around midday, 1 o'clock, I know around the time the NFL games are kicking off, but kind of the nature of the beast right now as Nick will be traveling with the team. And then Graham will be at the Gator Nationals as well, so covering that on Sunday. So he'll be joining us by phone call there. So busy time with traveling and some other obligations for their job. But we will talk Florida Ole Miss review on Sunday with Nick De La Torre and Graham Hall. So before we get started, remember you can get your Gators Breakdown merchandise on eBay. Head to ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown. You can see it right there on YouTube, the link there. And it's also in the description as well if you're not watching the YouTube version. But new look Gators Breakdown merchandise that you can find at ebay.com/str/Gators Breakdown. Before we get started, remember you can also find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators. Please share, rate, and review the show. Subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. That really helps us out a lot. Check us out on your favorite podcast platform if you don't watch us on YouTube. And follow Gators Breakdown on social media, Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. I'm joined now by Jake Evans, senior writer for the Rebel Walk, and big thanks to Ole Miss Evie for setting this one up. Jake, how you doing, man? And hey, look, we weren't so sure we were getting football this year, and here we are. Week 1 of the SEC. Some other college football games have been played already, but here we are, week 1 of the SEC, and it's Florida Ole Miss.
Yep, it's a big week. I mean, like you said, we weren't sure if we were ever going to get to this point. It's a relief that we are here. I mean, I guess technically we're still not there yet, but we're feeling pretty good right now. Rebels are excited. We've been buzzing all offseason with Lane Kiffin. We're ready to hit the ground running here. We're ready to, see what they actually do and just quit hearing about it.
I think we all are. Florida's got questions too. We're just waiting to get answered. Here we are. We get it all on Saturday. So, hey, look, we all know, especially as covering the team, it's been limited. It's been crazy trying to follow a college football team during this whole COVID pandemic and everything that goes on with that. A restricted offseason somewhat for the media. But with all that being said, what's been the assessment of how things were going under Lane Kiffin, and as we approach game 1, big culture change, I guess, from Matt Luke and Rich Rod and that offense to kind of shifting towards the popularity that is Lane Kiffin?
Yeah, well, one of the big things and one of the big knocks that people had on Matt Luke for a bunch of years that was that he was just kind of the best of a bad situation, that he was kind of the best option they had at the time. He came in right as Ole Miss was dealing with the tail end of their long, 10-year-long NCAA investigation. So he kind of was the best of a bad situation, and that's what we needed for the time. He helped the team stay afloat. He helped keep us, from really hitting rock bottom there. And that's kind of what I'll always credit him for, having done a great job of, like I said, keeping us afloat. However, with Lane Kiffin now for the first time in a handful of years, we're very excited. We are actually excited to see Ole Miss football. We feel good about what we've got. We're returning players. We're not dealing with a ton of injuries like we have in past years. And we've got a real kind of light at the end of the tunnel here because, for the last bunch of years, Ole Miss is basically competing for like 5th place in the SEC West, really and truly. We're competing to not be the worst team in our conference. So, when it comes down to it, we're excited. This is a fast team. It's a very, very young team. Last year, Ole Miss's offense pretty much thrived exclusively through true freshmen, being John Rice Plumlee and Jerry Neely. So, those guys, they've just got another year under their belt. Those are both 2-sport athletes that are helping lead the offense right there, both big baseball players. And so, we're excited. This is, like I said, it's a fast team. Lane Kiffin has kept a lot of the little nuances of his offense under wraps, just being a good football mind. I mean, the big question that, and I'll just go on and take us into this because I know it's probably the first question you're going to have is John Rice Plumlee versus Matt Corral. And that's what everybody wants to know. And really and truly, I don't think anybody knows yet. I really, really don't think anybody knows yet. All offseason, Kiffin has done. He has made it very, very clear to give both quarterbacks props, to talk about both of their progress, to not take one person over the other. Granted, Matt Corral he got about an extra week. Plumlee was dealing with a little injury. Plumlee was out of practice, but and a lot of people think that's given Matt Corral the edge, for the starting job this week. But, really and truly, I mean, Ole Miss released their first depth chart the other day, and every position, was scripted out pretty well. But quarterback, it had John Rice Plumlee or Matt Corral. So he's still not even ready to tell us yet. As much as we'd like to think that it'll be John Rice Plumlee, just being that he ended the season. He was the, most exciting piece of last season. Most people would like to think it's him. However, if you look back at Lane Kiffin's track record, guys like Matt Corral are a little bit more his style, guys that move, but it can also are primary passers. So, that's kind of where we're at right now. We really don't know. We expect to see a lot of both of them. We expect to see a good, healthy mix. But we're kind of still waiting on pins and needles like everybody else.
Okay, one more thing about Kiffin, and then one more question about the quarterback position as well. Is there anything that surprised you about Kiffin so far? Like I said, I know access is limited or whatever, but he has the reputation of being approachable, to the media, because he likes to talk to the media. He likes to get out there. He's very out there social media as well. He really has that aspect about him that I think fans cater to, and maybe even his players cater to as well. But in the limited access, is there anything that surprised you about Lane Kiffin so far?
Well, the thing that surprised me the most is just he seems to be a lot calmer and a lot more mature. One of the big knocks that people have had on him for years and years and years, I mean, as long as he's been a coach in the public eye, it's been about his maturity. It's been about decisions he's made and things he's said and people he's associated himself with. And so he's had knocks on, really it has nothing to do with him as a coach. He's a fantastic football coach. He's always been a good football coach. It's always been personal issues. And that's what has always held people back from being able to fully commit to somebody like Lane Kiffin. But looking at him right now and having heard him talk and things like that, I think he's kind of turned a new page because, Lane Kiffin kind of took the reverse route that most coaches take in their career. He started in the NFL. He started with the Raiders and basically worked his way down to Florida Atlantic last year and is now back at Ole Miss. Versus, most coaches, they'll start at the very bottom and they'll work their way up to the NFL. So, he's taken a very unconventional route in his career. He's a very interesting guy. He's a smart guy, and he got thrown into this profession very, very young. And so that's been the thing that's been the most surprising this offseason is he just, when you ask a question, you don't expect him to blurt out an answer. You expect him to sit there and he just kind of goes, and he just kind of looks at you and he just kind of thinks for a second. And it's a weird little. It's a weird little thing for me to be picking on, but it just seems like he's more mature. It seems like he thinks, before he talks now, not to say that he's never done that, but I think he's really, really realized the mistakes of his past. And I think he's realized where he falls short in people's minds and how he could embarrass the people around him. And so I think he's just made steps to make sure that he doesn't ever do that again. I don't think he ever wants to have to look for a job again. I think he would like to be at Ole Miss as long as he could be.
If speaking of that maturity part, I mean, when he was head coach at Tennessee, going against Florida, he predicted a win over Florida as Tennessee head coach going into that game. So yeah, I don't think we've got any predictions that he's saying Ole Miss is going to beat Florida yet. So
right.
There's one example already from about a decade ago.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things he's got a great personality. He's a lively guy. I mean, like I said, he's still young. Even though he's been in the coaching game for years. Hey, buddy. Even though he's been in the coaching game for years, he's still a young guy. And so, it's good to see that he's maturing, and it seems like he's a seasoned veteran. Really, that's what it seems like. It seems like he's a seasoned veteran, and he's finally realized, okay, I need to pump the brakes in these situations. I need to think about what I say. This could come back. It seems like he's been there, done that, and he's more comfortable with the position and he's more comfortable with the moment. And as a fan and having just hired that and having come off of many years of bad football at Ole Miss, that's all we could hope for. We're fired up to see that. Yeah.
So, okay, we'll go at the quarterback in just right now. Of course, I like you, I expect to see both quarterbacks on the field. And even thinking about it with Lane Kiffin and his creativity in offense and just trying to get the most out of an offense, I really wouldn't doubt if we saw Corral and Plumlee on the field at the same time. Yeah, that's something that's totally in the realm of possibilities. That's kind of been the suspicion since day one that if he does start Matt Corral, that John Rhys Plumlee will find another place to play. He'll find a slot position. He'll find some kind of wing back, some kind of something, because his talent's undeniable. Whether or not you think he can throw the football is another question, but his talent is undeniable. He's the fastest player on the field. He proved that last year time and time again. Before we move on there, Dan Mullen even said it this week. We recruited him as a cornerback because he was so fast. Yeah, he's a fantastic athlete. I mean, and the thing is he's got that speed that's just kind of next level where it's, he's fast, but nobody is prepared for how fast he actually is. You see him, he beats guys to the corner. He's able to beat guys and turn upfield and get north and south. And he does very, very good things with the football in his hands. And that's what makes it so difficult for Lane Kiffin is even if he wants Matt Corral to be his quarterback, he's got to find a place to put John Rhys Plumlee because, like I said, the talent is undeniable. The real challenge is going to come in mixing that offense up with those two guys because most people are going to expect that Matt Corral comes in the game, the Rebs are throwing the football. Plumlee taking the snap, they're probably running it. So the challenge is going to come in not making it, completely obvious which one is, doing which. That's going to be where the real question is because, like I just said, everybody knows Corral's primarily a passer, Plumlee primarily a runner. And so that's where he's going to really have to mix it up this year. And that's where you're going to see that kind of offensive genius that we hope we have, for the Rebs. We hope that we get to see that this year because Ole Miss has dynamic weapons. I mean, there's no denying it. Whether or not they're ready to perform and compete for the SEC is another question, but they have weapons. Right. And we'll start with one weapon here. And, either way, the Ole Miss has got to get better passing the ball, whether it be Corral or Plumlee taking another step and helping in that regard too. But Elijah Moore, 67 passes caught last year, but more of the question behind him, who's the number 2 receiver? The guy, the leading pass catcher, only just caught 13 passes, behind Elijah Moore, 67 last year. So how important is it for this offense and, to find another receiver to help Moore out? And who are the guys that can step up in that position? Or maybe even pass catching tight ends. Yeah. Well, that you're exactly right. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, Ole Miss made its name with guys like A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Dawson Knox, all 3 NFL players right now, all 3, contributing big time to their teams in year 2. And even Van Jefferson, who transferred to Florida. Exactly. That totally even slipped my mind. Van Jefferson Ole Miss was so stacked at receiver. Ole Miss was so good in their passing game when those guys were in college that Van Jefferson got kicked out of the wide receiver room, and he's catching passes for the Rams now. The receiver room that was there 3 or 4 years ago was just absolutely stacked. And so that's what Ole Miss was known for.
but then it got to a point where there wasn't a quarterback to go with it. There wasn't a quarterback to throw the ball. Jordan Ta'amu was the last one that Ole Miss had. And then it turned over into the Matt Corral, John Rice Plumlee situation. So, like you said, Elijah Moore was the only one who was consistent last year. It was no secret that Ole Miss was probably going to try and run the ball 35 times a game, if not more. And that they were pretty much only going to pass when they absolutely had to. That was something that, was made pretty clear pretty early in the season. And to be honest, it wasn't, it worked. So no knock on it. But like you said, Ole Miss has got to find another guy. You can't. The thing is you can rely on 1 year where you got this finicky out there talent in John Rice Plumlee, and then you've got a good running back behind him. You've got one really good wide receiver. You just got to be able to put more weapons together. They've got various weapons all over the field, but they've got to be able to get more consistent ones. That was another problem too, is that Ole Miss really and truly, it wasn't like Elijah Moore was just miles and miles better than all these people. The other guys, the Braylon Sanderses, the Jonathan Mingos, the who else? The Dontario Drummonds, they just didn't play that well when they got their chances. They dropped some passes. They really just didn't step up to the moment. And when it came down to it, Elijah Moore was the only guy that the coaching staff knew they could rely on. It also helps that he gets open more times than not. But he was the only real guy that they really, really, were honed in on, that they thought that could really do it for him. And so, yeah, with this is the depth chart that Ole Miss released the other day. And a lot of this is, based on rotation. I don't think it's going to be like we only see 3 or 4 guys. I think we're going to see a pretty healthy rotation. A lot of these guys are sophomores and juniors together. So they're like I said, Ole Miss had great receivers a handful of years ago. They kind of lacked for a couple of years in that in the recruiting department there. And then they replaced, a bunch of good receivers after that. So they kind of skipped a few years, but now they've got a handful of guys that are really developing and really should be good receivers. You're looking across the board. You got Jonathan Mingo, you got Dontario Drummond, Braylon Sanders, Miles Battle, DeMarcus Gregory, Elijah Moore, Dennis Jackson. These guys are all receivers that have played before. They have not contributed big time, but these are all receivers that have played. So, I'd expect to see Jonathan Mingo be a big guy this year. He was a guy that the Rebs really were looking to count on early in the season. They made it clear that they wanted him in the offense. He just didn't perform as well as they thought he would. So his role kind of got, backed up a little bit. But that's a guy that I expect the Rebs to try and use a lot this year. Dontario Drummond being another one. Braylon Sanders is a guy who they've kind of used as a slot, wide receiver hybrid. He's a guy who's got experience. He's been a playmaker since he was a freshman. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. He's had a nagging hamstring injury for, seems like forever. Multiple years. He's a guy who can contribute, a lot too. That's a guy who's proven that he can contribute. He's just got to stay healthy. So, Jonathan Mingo is probably the primary person I'd say. Dontario Drummond behind him. If Braylon Sanders can stay healthy, that'd be fantastic. And then, the Rebs have Kenny Ubowa coming in this year. Kenny Ubowa coming in as tight end, a transfer from Temple, grad transfer. So that's a new piece of the offense. Kenny Ubowa, he was a good pass catcher at Temple. I'm not exactly, I can't say this for certain, for myself, but I've heard that apparently Kenny Bowe works very well with this offense that Lane Kiffin's running. I don't know the exact nuances, so I don't know exactly why they're saying that he works so well in it, but apparently Ubowa works in this offense. So it seems like Ole Miss has the weapons they need all across the field. It's really and truly, they just have to get them to actually perform this year. They've had the weapons. They just haven't stepped up to the plate yet.
And of course, the quarterbacks have some athleticism, can make play with their legs, of course, especially Plumlee there. But 2 running backs at Kiffin have to be excited about. And to me, building an offense around those guys and finding a way to get them the ball. Jerrion Ely, Snoop Connor, plenty of carries under Lane Kiffin are coming with those guys. And even with a lack of passing game last year, you had Ely who nearly averaged 7 yards to carry there. So, Lane Kiffin does like to be balanced. I know he gets a lot of credit for quarterback play in his offenses, but he likes to be balanced, and he's got 2 running backs there to start that with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was looking up some numbers last night because that's what everybody says. Lane Kiffin's known for his quarterbacks. Look at his quarterbacks. The whole track record. Everybody talks about that. But I was looking at it last night. Lane Kiffin's first 3 years let's see. Yeah. It was all 3 of his years that he was there. Devin Singletary, who's now the running back for the Bills, He ran for 4,200 yards and 66 touchdowns in his 3 years at Florida Atlantic. That's not in a primarily passing offense right there. For those handful of years, they were a primary running team with Lane Kiffin. And then this past season with Chris Robinson, he was the 9th leading passer in the country, threw for about 3,700 yards. And so even in that short stint at Florida Atlantic, some of his teams were primarily running teams, and some of his teams were primarily passing teams. He's done it.
He adapts.
Yeah, he adapts, and that's something that people were knocking him on early in the time, is saying, you know, he's got to have this type of quarterback. He's got to be able to put this kind of offense in. I don't think that's the case. I think Lane Kiffin is a lot better football coach, and I think he's a lot better at using what he has to his advantage than people give him credit for. And so, you know, and everybody, you know, Blake Sims, a guy who wasn't even a quarterback when he got to Alabama. Blake Sims in 2014, Lane Kiffin turned him into a 3,500-yard passer. He threw 28 touchdowns. He took him to the Sugar Bowl that year. Lane Kiffin knows how to take the pieces that he likes and use them to his advantage. That's why I'm really, really interested to see what the Reds are going to do with John Rice Plumlee this year, is because Blake Sims, I think had a little bit better natural arm than John Rice did, or maybe does right now. But that's why I'm really excited to see somebody like, you know, Plumlee in this offense, because I'm excited to see if he wants to make him a real quarterback, or if he's going to use him as kind of that wildcat. He can throw it, but he's probably going to run it, but you don't really know. So, you know, that's one of those ones where you're just excited. I'm excited to see it because he's done a good job. He's shown over the course of his career that he can adapt. He can put the right people in the right situations, and that he's not a one-dimensional kind of guy. If he was a one-dimensional kind of guy, he wouldn't have made it back to the SEC to be a head coach. He would have been figured out at Florida Atlantic, and that would have been the end of it. He probably would have never made another rise like this. But the fact that he's dynamic, he won the conference with Florida Atlantic 2 years in a row. He's a good, or 2 out of 3 years. He's a good coach. He knows how to use the pieces around him, and he knows how to turn them into better versions of what other people see them as. John Rice Plumlee is not, just because he's a quarterback doesn't mean he has to throw the ball 30 times a game.
Yep.
He might throw it 12 times a game and then run for $170. And guess what? We still get a win, and it doesn't matter how it happened. So, you know, that's one of the things, like I said, I'm really excited to see how he uses what he's got around him. He's got a good track record of balancing and using what he needs to, not hitching his wagons to one thing just for the sake of doing it. He's clearly good at you know, staying on his toes and balancing it, and like I said, using what he's got.
Jake Evans, senior writer for the Rebel Walk, joining us here on Gators. We'll break down a couple more questions as we preview the Ole Miss Rebels here. And I mean, offensive line, of course, I think we have to look at that position because, look, that's what Matt Luke was known for. I mean, that's it. So to me, it's got to be somewhat of a culture shock going from Matt Luke, who is a head coach who, you know, really knows the offensive line, and probably that's his baby as a head coach, to go into Lane Kiffin. So what's the early word on the offensive line? A lot of young players there as well. Then I think during the camp they had an injury bout and a COVID bout kind of in that position group. So how would you assess that group as we head into the first game?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's good that you mentioned COVID and everything like that. I wanted to mention that the Rebs have no positive test for, I think, the second week in a row now. Okay. You know, everybody's good and healthy. It doesn't look like you know, there's any possibility of the Wake Forest situation where we have to it doesn't look like there's a Notre Dame Wake Forest situation, you know, in the cards here. So that's good. But yeah, you know, Matt Luke, his whole time at Ole Miss, he started as the offensive line coach, you know, before he eventually became the head coach. And so, like you said, offensive line was kind of his baby. You know, those are the guys he knew the most. Those are the guys he'd worked with the most. And when it came down to it, you know, his offense kind of reflected that. It was kind of built around what they could do the most comfortably. And that's not to say that's not a bad thing. If your offensive line can't run block, then you don't need to run the ball. It's as simple as that. And he recognized that, you know, the offensive lines that we've had over the last couple of years haven't been, you know, incredible. But yeah, you know, one of the things that's really good is that it's a very young offensive line, like you said, but they're very confident in it, which is, you know, you always hear teams in there, we love the guys we got in our room, and the offensive line room's great. It's all good and great to say that, but when it comes down to it, if you've got as many young guys as Ole Miss has in this room, you're not expecting those guys to feel good about what they've got. They can try and tell you that they're excited, but you can really tell in their voices, and you can see that these guys might not be comfortable. That's not the case at Ole Miss right now. these guys seem like they're hanging around with a bunch of seasoned veterans. It seems like there's more than, a handful of guys on this offensive line that have started before. It seems like these are guys who have seen SEC snaps and seen SEC looks and know what they're getting themselves into and how to deal with it. It's really, it's something that we're fired up for. Like I said, our offensive lines haven't been fantastic over the last couple of years. But even though it's really young this year, we're excited for it. Looking at it, Ben Brown coming back, he's going to be kind of the anchor of this offensive line. Him and Nick Broker. Ben Brown's going to be playing center this year. Nick Broker is going to be playing left tackle. Those are both guys who have played before. Nick Broker saw a lot of time last year as a true freshman. And Ben Brown, like I said, is the one that we believe is going to be the anchor. When you got Royce Newman at right tackle, probably, actually not even probably, 100% has the best mullet in the SEC. If you don't know who I'm talking about, you ought to go look up Royce Newman. It speaks for itself.
I saw that floating around on Twitter today.
Yep. It's a fantastic picture. And then the Rebs are, with the two guard positions, right guard, they're expecting to see Jeremy James there, and then we're expected to see Reese McIntyre at left. But there's a lot of guys that are in that mix that they, I'm not going to say that I think Ole Miss is going to rotate the offensive line, because I think that's a very questionable thing to do with offensive linemen. But I think we're going to see more than just the 5 or 6 guys that are the big names on this offensive line. I think Ole Miss likes a lot of the people. I think that the other thing too, it's really unfortunate that Ole Miss has to play someone like Florida week 1, somebody this good week 1. I would really, really like a week to work these kinks out. I mean, we're working with a new coach. We're working with like a million freshmen. Y'all need to cut us a break here. I mean, the thing is we usually get like a little bit easier warm-up game. We don't just get thrown straight into the freaking swamp with, a top 10 Florida team. I mean, that's just downright cruel with a new head coach. But, it is what it is. I mean, like I said, I expect there to be I expect there to be kinks in this offense. I expect it to take a few weeks for this to, really hit the ground running and really be churning on all cylinders like we want it. But, like we were talking about at the beginning of this game, one of the things that I think Ole Miss has going for them is I think Ole Miss's speed and athleticism in certain areas is better than Florida's. And really and truly, I think Ole Miss has that speed and athleticism better than a lot of the people they'll play this year. We talked about before, Ole Miss's offensive line. I don't remember the exact number. I have to go back and try and find it, but I think it's somewhere around 89% of Ole Miss's offense last year came from true freshmen, being primarily John Rice Plumlee and Jerry Neely. And so those are two of the most dynamic playmakers in the SEC. Regardless of whatever you have to say about Ole Miss, that's just factual. Those guys can fly. They're elusive. They proved it last year as freshmen, and I can't expect them to take any kind of a step back as sophomores. And so, that's one of the things that Ole Miss has working really well for them is that they've got speed, they've got athleticism. Ole Miss, I think, more than Florida, has the ability for the big play and the kind of, like I said earlier, maybe the 80-yard touchdown run, maybe return a kick or something like that. I think Ole Miss has that potential. I think that's probably what's going to keep them in this game. But like I was talking about earlier with the kinks, I think that there's going to be too many natural kinks in this offense that we're going to end up seeing. Too much to the point that I don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to consistently put drives together and stay with a good team like Florida.
Now we'll move to the other side of the ball, of course, before we wrap up here with you. And co-coordinators on the defensive side of the ball, and one familiar face for Florida, DJ Durkin, who spent some time at Florida, and Will Muschamp, of course, head coach at Maryland before some unfortunate events there, and then of course Chris Partridge as well coming over. And then look, this is a defense that struggled defending the pass last year, whether it be on the back end, whether it be up front at certain points of the season. So got a lot of work cut out for them, and especially on that back end of replacing some important pieces back there on that defense.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that we're optimistic about heading into this year is the fact that, yes, Ole Miss is very young in a lot of places on defense, but the thing is most of those guys that are very, very young players got thrown into the fire last year. Ole Miss had a slew of injuries on the defense. It seems like they always do. Knock on wood that we're not dealing with that this year, because that's the last thing we need. But last year Ole Miss dealt with a lot of injuries, and we had to see a lot of younger guys play, probably a lot quicker than they thought they were going to play. And so when you look across the board now, yeah, you've still got a lot of underclassmen, but they're guys who have seen time before. So when we're looking at the depth chart here, Tariqius Tisdale is a freak of nature. He's playing defensive end. He's got Ryder Anderson behind him. Those two guys, they're both like 8 feet tall, 300 pounds, and they run like 4.4s. The guys can absolutely move. They're fantastic athletes. Those are two guys who played for a long time. Both looking at the defensive end spot right there. So we're feeling good where we are there. Once we get into the middle, there's a little bit more the interior of the defensive line. We're expecting to see KD Hill, who's a guy who's been here for 2 years. He got to campus, and it was kind of known that he was going to be a 2-year project behind Benito Jones and Josiah Coatney. Two guys who were very, very good for Ole Miss for a handful of years on that interior defensive line. And so KD Hill's a guy that he's a work in progress, and he's finally getting a chance to show it this Saturday, which is exciting. But then you got other guys around the offense. You got Brandon Mack, who's a sophomore. You got Jay Stanley, who's a sophomore. You got a handful of guys who are young players, but had to play last year. And because of that, I think it's going to pay dividends for Ole Miss's defense this year. I think that they're probably still going to struggle. I think that I think it's just inevitable. But I think Ole Miss has a better chance than a lot of people think, because they kind of accidentally gave themselves experience in a lot of areas. And so, even though, like I said, it's a lot of young people, I think there's more experience than we would like to believe. The secondary, we feel good about the secondary. You got Keidron Smith and Jalen Jones, two guys who played a lot of football for Ole Miss. When you look at the linebacking group, that's probably where we feel the most confident on defense. We've got Sam Williams coming back, a guy who's he was one of the top recruits coming out of JUCO 2 years ago. He's a long, fast pass rusher. He's just kind of, he's one of those guys that it seems like he gets to the quarterback at will when he wants to. So he's a fantastic player coming off the edge there. You got Lakia Henry playing that will linebacker. He was a guy who came out of JUCO last year. He's a human hit stick.
About that linebacker core, Partridge and Durkin love the blitz. So I think with that linebacker core, I think we'll probably see even more of it than the Rebels are used to, because those are two coordinators there that really love to bring the pressure.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing too is, one of the things that hurts Ole Miss so bad is that, or has hurt Ole Miss so bad over the last couple of years, is that they haven't had, they've had good pieces on the D line, but it hasn't been to the point where it's a good unit that you feel comfortable rushing the passer with. Ole Miss did it. I'm not to say that Ole Miss hasn't rushed the passer in like 3 years, but they don't do it as much as they probably need to, given the pieces they had, which puts a lot of pressure on your secondary. Inevitably, if you have to cover somebody for 14 seconds every play because the quarterback's running around, it's probably not going to work out for you. Somebody's probably going to get open. And so, a lot of that's something that we really are looking forward to also, because like we said, we feel like we've got a lot of good, aggressive pass rushing, run stopping pieces on the D line and in the linebacking core. And like I said, it's guys who have played before. When we look at our middle linebacker spot right now, we've got a guy in Momo Sonogo who's currently listed as the second string. He'll rotate at will, this week, but that's a guy who's listed as a backup. He made 110 tackles in the SEC 2 years ago. He had a bad injury, I think in week 2 last year, broke his ankle, or I think in week 2 last year, and missed the rest of the season. But that's a guy who's played a lot of football. He's been a leader. And he's not just played a lot of football. He's played a lot of good football. So there's him. You've got Jacquez Jones in front of him. Dalen Gill, apparently he's a new face who's apparently been one of the stars of the camp. And then, like I said, you've got Keidron Smith, Jalen Jones, AJ Finley on the back end playing defense. And then one of the other guys that we're really looking forward to that I wanted to make a special note about, Mark Britt. Mark Britt, he's a 4-star recruit, came out of Miami last year. He came to Ole Miss as a 4-star receiver. Ole Miss over the summer was struggling so badly with some injuries early in the season. They moved Mark to defensive back out of necessity. And it looks like he's actually going to end up playing on Saturday. It looks like he's actually going to maybe even, be a consistent rotation piece there. That's somebody that we're really looking forward to. Apparently, Mark Britt can flat out fly. Apparently, he is a lot better of a natural cornerback than we were led to believe. Maybe he was listed he's listed now as an athlete. Even though he was a receiver coming out of high school. But, that's, like I said, that's another guy where we feel good. We think he's a fantastic athlete. We're excited for what he's got. The coaches talk highly about him. And so, when you look across the defense, all in all, like you said, with Partridge and Durkin, those are two guys who they've got good track records as defensive minds. And I think they've got good defensive pieces here that work well with their style. I think we're going to see an improved Ole Miss defense. I think there's still going to be kinks naturally, but I think we're going to see a much improved Ole Miss defense this year.
And Jake, before we let you go here, last question. Of course, Florida coming off double-digit win seasons in Dan Mullen's first couple seasons at Florida. You guys very familiar with Dan Mullen, of course, being head coach of Mississippi State. So what's been your thoughts on Dan Mullen and his time at Florida and what you're expecting to see from Florida on Saturday?
Well, I tell you, Dan Mullen's time at Florida has been nothing short of a complete disappointment to me because I don't like him. He's been so good that it drives me crazy. It drives me absolutely crazy. I mean, when he was at Mississippi State, he kind of, and not to say that there wasn't already plenty of natural fuel on the fire, when it comes to the Egg Bowl rivalry. But when he came to Mississippi State, he made it a point that we were going to beat the school up north. They were going to beat the school up north. And all this stuff. And so, it was almost like, we don't care if we go 1-11. If we beat the Ole Miss Rebels, we have to beat the season. So, he threw a lot of fire. He threw a lot of fuel on the fire and everything. The Reds had some good games with them over the years. He had some good teams. So did Ole Miss. That was kind of right in that, time of him when Mississippi State and Ole Miss were both in the top three at the same time. I mean, what world was that? But he's a good coach. As much as I want to hate him, and as much as I think he's a goober sometimes, he's a good football coach. He's proved it. I mean, at this point, denying it would just be like sticking my head in the couch. Like, it doesn't get me anywhere. I mean, it is what it is. He's a good football coach. I think that he's got a good thing going at Florida. I hope they continue to let him ride it out. I hope they let him continue to build the program. I think he's doing a good job. I don't think Florida as a football team, as a football program, I don't think it's very difficult to sell that to a lot of people. Florida is one of the blue bloods of college football. And so I think Dan Mullen in a place like that, he might be there for a long time.
Yeah, Gator fans are hoping so, for sure. And like you kind of mentioned, the bad blood between Ole Miss and Mississippi State there. You got the Florida-Georgia game here. So, he's got to turn that around a bit more and get on the winning side like he did in the Egg Bowl a bit for Gator fans. But Gator fans through 2 years are absolutely happy with Dan Mullen's brought to the table there. So, Jake, man, hey, I can't thank you enough. Great preview for the Ole Miss Rebels in the game this Saturday. We finally get some football. Lane Kiffin versus Florida once again. We only got it 1 year when he was at Tennessee, so good to see him back. Good to see him back in the SEC. Jake, right. let everybody know where they can find you, man.
Yeah, you can find my personal account at JimmyMan23 there. That's me on Twitter. But I would encourage you instead to go find at The Rebel Walk. Find that on Twitter. Find it on Facebook, Instagram, everything. Evie does a fantastic job with the site. She's been doing a lot more work than I have lately. I got to give her mad props for that. Evie's been a lot more on top of her game than I have recently. Evie's done a fantastic job. Rebel Walk is, we're positively Ole Miss. That's our slogan. It's been difficult over the last couple of years to be positive with the Rebs, but we think we turned a corner here. The future's looking bright. We're excited. Go check us out at the Rebel Walk and rebelwalk.com for all your Ole Miss coverage.
Jake, man, once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to the game on Saturday.
Dave, thank you much. Hotty toddy.
Unless you've been living under a rock, football season is back and the NBA playoffs are in full swing, which can only mean one thing. It's winning season at MyBookie. A game is 10 times more exciting when you're putting money on it. Sometimes you have a gut feeling about a matchup, or sometimes you just want to bet on your team because they're your team. Regardless, whether you've been betting for years or you're ready to play for the first time, MyBookie is your best bet this season. With the biggest online selection of bets and props, they've made it simple to win and easy to get your cash. Right now, MyBookie has a $100,000 super contest for only a $10 entry, and they're giving away $5,000 in cash prizes every 4 weeks. You'd be crazy not to invest your sports knowledge with that kind of potential return on your investment. $10 to win thousands, it's a no-brainer. Sign up at MyBookie and use promo code Gators, and you can grab a free $20 wager with your first deposit to bet on anything in the sports book. It's an easy way to jumpstart your bankroll. College football, NFL, NBA, and MLB, they've got it all on tap, and it's never too late to get started on your winning season, only at MyBookie. So here we go. good interview there, but we'll get even more in depth here with Ole Miss from a Gator perspective, my perspective here. So of course, Lane Kiffin's coming in. Of course, well known there. But he's bringing in offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby from UCF as they try and bring a different offensive course than what Rich Rodriguez was doing in that heavy run style that he likes to bring to the table. And Matt Luke, who's an offensive line background, so he kind of suited what he wanted to do as well, what Rich Rod wanted to do. Offensive linemen like to run the ball. That's just kind of their nature of the beast there. So the offense is going to change a bit. So, that brings a quarterback controversy as well. Matt Corral, John Rice Plumlee, that's been well documented. And as I said, we mentioned it earlier in the week that the last year's Rebel team, they put up some good fights. 5 of the losses were by 8 points or fewer. And in the last 5 games of the season, they went 1-4, but fought hard in losing 24-17 to Texas A&M, 20-14 to Auburn, 58-37 to LSU. Everybody kind of remembers where Plumlee went off in that game. The score, it was a little closer than that. And then the end of the season heartbreaker, their other loss there was 21-20 loss to Ole Miss. So the offense, as I said, run heavy, finished second in the SEC and 9th in the country rushing the ball. But at the same time, led the SEC in giving up tackles for loss. It was kind of, in a way, feast or famine for that offense. But they could count on running the ball. But like I said, that's Rich Rod, that they were going to run the ball a lot, especially with their quarterback struggling passing the ball. They were going to run the ball a whole lot. So, I've brought it up, and I'll bring it up again because a lot of you brought it up on Twitter that you like that part of it, and kind of have to bring it up again is, Florida's issues tackling early on in the last couple seasons against Kentucky, the second game of 2018, and then last year opening up versus Miami. It's got to be brought up, especially in a year where COVID comes up and you worry about the physicality of the team anyway. Given Florida's history the last couple years, it's another point to look at here. So, if Ole Miss can continue their running success from last season, it's going to start with running back Jerrion Ealy, who averaged almost 7 yards a carry last season, and with his speed and big playability. And then you have Snoop Connor, who's a tough downhill runner, and he averaged 6.3 yards a carry last year. So Ole Miss will try and run the ball, and that's the first thing I'm looking for is the physicality from this Florida defense, no matter who the quarterback is. And look, Lane Kiffin likes to run the ball, and maybe a misconception there that he doesn't, but Lane Kiffin's Florida Atlantic offense last year led Conference USA with a passing game that averaged 283 yards per game and a ground attack that averaged 166. So he likes running the ball. Lane Kiffin likes having balance. Now, look, we remember that back in his Alabama days as OC too as well, but he had some pretty good running backs going back to his time there. So you got to run the ball when you have those running backs at Alabama. But he likes to balance the ball or balance his play calling a bit here. So, of course, Matt Corral's back, team high, 1,363 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, 59% completion percentage. Plumlee ran for a team high 1,023 yards and 12 touchdowns, only completed 53% of his passes, while the offense ran the ball 63% of the time. And here's my thing. Don't be surprised to see Plumlee maybe play another position on our offense in addition to some quarterback. I think we'll see him line up at quarterback, maybe slot receiver style or running back in the backfield with Corral. They're not necessarily a running back, but how Lane Kiffin likes to get creative. You may have 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time there. So he's that electric with the ball in his hands. Kiffin likes to get creative. So look for Plumlee and Corral at some point, I think, to be on the field at the same time. And I just don't, but looking at it, I just don't see many successful drives throughout the day for this Ole Miss offense. This is sorry, those just bothered me a little bit, but here we go. This is for this Florida defense, it's a really do your job type of game for Florida. Forget about all the window dressing Kiffin is going to throw at you. This is going to be a good test for some of the new pieces for this Florida defense. Can the rush in and Bucks hold contain when needed? Can the linebackers stay in their gap? Kiffin, he wants to get defenses thinking, but also likes to lull them asleep before trying to hit some big plays down the field. So, look, these safeties just can't give up cheap big plays either that we saw times at last year. So, this is a good first test for every level of the Florida defense. Don't let that stuff happen early, and I just don't see Ole Miss being able to hang with Florida's defense throughout a whole game. And if we go to the other side of the ball, for this Rebels defense, the land shark defense that they like to call it, and two defensive coordinators. They got co-coordinators here. Chris Partridge, former Michigan special teams coach, and DJ Durkin, of course, a history at Michigan as well with Jim Harbaugh, but also a history at Florida with Will Muschamp. And then they had their work cut out for him in trying to fix that Ole Miss secondary. Brought this up on the last episode as well. Be tough. They lose two starters back on that back end. That gave up an SEC worst 278 yards per game, and that was with a pass rush that came up with 33 sacks. So, I kind of remember having 33 sacks, and I remember in the summertime kind of reading about Ole Miss a little bit, and then I had to go back because I had trouble remembering where I found it, but it was in Athlon's magazine here, and according to Athlon, Ole Miss posted a 8.5% sack rate on standard downs. That's first down, second and 7 or less, third or fourth down, and 4 yards less to go on those downs. So that was the highest rate of an SEC defense in top 10 nationally, the 8.5% sack rate on standard downs. So, pretty good there. So in downs that they could really disguise their defense and coverages, they did a great job of getting to the quarterback. But that didn't translate to passing downs. And when the Rebels defense was at the bottom of the SEC and 112th in the nation with a 5.1% sack rate on passing down. So, maybe Durkin and Partridge history of blitzing will make that look a bit different. But in predictable situations, in passing situations, when the offense knew, when Ole Miss knew that the offense was going to pass, for whatever reason, they couldn't get to the quarterback there. So maybe you couldn't really disguise there because the offense knew what they were doing, and early downs you can kind of disguise your coverages a bit more. So something to look forward to there is if that kind of shows up here in the first game of the season. But a completely different defense for Ole Miss this year. So they lose interior playmakers. All SEC Benito Jones is gone, and Josiah Coatney there, defensive end Austrian Robinson, who were all big contributors to last year's team. Great test for the Florida passing game, and Trash to see where they are as far as getting in sync and getting in a rhythm. In their last 4 games, Auburn, New Mexico State, LSU, and Mississippi State last year, the Rebels gave up over 70% of their passes. I think Kyle Trask probably is looking at that too. So, as I said, different defense this year, though. But so you got to look at what can Ole Miss improve upon, and especially like what we think Florida can do with Kyle Trask. That's pretty important there. The last 4 games last year for Ole Miss gave up over 70% of their passes. 9 teams on their schedule last year had at least 64% passing on this defense. So they need a big improvement there on the back end as well as questions up front. If they don't improve there for this first game of the 2020 season, Florida could have a field day on offense. But, all dependent offensive line, giving Trask more time, so maybe some more downfield plays can be made. I don't think early. I'd be surprised if we see that early. But Trask is given time versus a secondary that really has to prove itself with some new pieces and a defense switching coordinators and systems. Then we may see an offense that looks a lot like last season given the matchup, but also with so many new faces up front and on the back end. Maybe you set it up early with the run, let that help open up the pass. But, if I'm Ole Miss, I make this Florida offensive line and running backs prove that they can run the ball better than they could last season. Before I start letting Kyle Trask pick me apart. I make Florida run the ball and see, Ethan White's going to be out. The Florida offensive line is going to count on him. We got Stuart Reese. So, we know all the questions along the Florida offensive line in the run game. Can they show up in what I think an Ole Miss defense that's going to try and let them run the ball early, just not to get beat by that Florida passing game. So, if the Gators offense is in sync this game, Mullen might have a chance to toy around a little bit, have a good bit of fun on offense. One player I do want to look out for this Ole Miss defense, I think the player we should all watch out for, defensive end linebacker Sam Williams, senior there, 6'3", 251 pounds, managed to become one of the team's best all-around forces last year. Now, look, he only made 37 tackles. But look at those 37 tackles if you want to look for a player that might be breaking through for Ole Miss. 6 sacks, 9.5 tackles for loss, and also the leading returner in 7 quarterback hurries. So We all know DJ Durkin likes to blitz, and this year Williams could be ready to blow up as one of those hybrid edge rushers there. He's coming off an Egg Bowl performance, the last game of the season last year for Ole Miss. 6 tackles, 3 for a loss, and 1 sack in that game. So Sam Williams, I think, is a player when that game starts at noon on Saturday and Ole Miss is on defense, look for Sam Williams and kind of see what he's going to be bringing to the table there. So with all that said, here we go. We end up here with kind of a score prediction. I don't know. Maybe I should quit doing scores, but it's fun. I hope a lot of people don't take it all too serious. I just, it's not a guessing game for me. I like to have fun with it though, but it is what it is. And people take these predictions too hard a lot of the time. So I'll be wrong plenty of times, believe me, with scores. Hopefully I won't be wrong too many times in picking the Gators to win this year, but we'll see how that goes. But with this game 1 of the 2020 season at Oxford versus Ole Miss, I got Florida winning 33-17. Maybe a slow start for the offense and trying to work on the ground game because that's what will be there early on. Maybe some short passes as well as we saw many times that short passing game kind of helped out the run game last year. And that's just part of Mullen's offense. To me, last year it was kind of 50-50. It was Mullen likes to run those type of plays, but also needed to run those type of plays because of the lack of the run game there. So, I just think that'd be the plan on early. And hopefully wide receivers can break some of these short passes up or early on, break them open. Eventually, with all the questions on that Ole Miss defensive front on the back end, I think Florida has success in the ground game to keep the Ole Miss defense honest, and then Trash just starts picking them apart as the game moves on defense. I think Kiffin schemes up something early that'll catch the defense off guard. They'll get a cheap score, and that'll be that, and the defense will control the rest of the game. I see only one more Ole Miss touchdown being scored throughout the game. As long as it's Florida's defense, and I'll bring it up again, is ready to play in a physical style of game. So I would be really interested in seeing how the pressure and sack numbers in this game add up. You may get a ton of pressure on both of these Ole Miss quarterbacks, but they're athletic. They can escape the pocket. So you may see a ton of pressure, but not many sack numbers here. So that's what I want to look for, is how much is Florida pressuring, how much is Florida actually getting to the quarterback. So 33-17 is the final score I have as the Gators hopefully knock off the Ole Miss Rebels. And as we do every week, we also will take a look around the SEC and, of course, the whole SEC conference. Well, I hate saying SEC conference because you're basically saying Southeastern Conference. So the whole SEC will kick off this weekend. Of course, as I said, Florida, Ole Miss, we all know that game's at noon. To me, the game of the week in the SEC is also at noon. Kentucky and Auburn. I hate that game's at noon. I really want to watch that game, so it'll be on a tablet at the same time as we watch that. But I'm picking Kentucky to upset Auburn here. I think Auburn has too many questions in the trenches on offensive line and defensive line, and having to replace all that from last year. Kentucky's very strong in the trenches under Mark Stoops. You got Terry Wilson returning for Kentucky. I'd be interested to see how healthy he is. But I'm telling you, I'm glad we don't play Kentucky early in the season because that's just a physical style of brand of football. If they're anywhere as close as physical as they usually are, they're going to give a lot of teams trouble early on in the season. And I think Auburn's going to be the first casualty of that. So I got Kentucky upsetting Auburn. I think a lot of people out there do. I know Auburn's favored. Vegas may know something out there, but I think a lot of people are kind of favoring Kentucky there. And then at 3:30, CBS game of the week, LSU, Mississippi State, so the defending national champions versus Mike Leach. So everything that LSU lost this past season and this offseason after winning the national championship and opt-outs and, of course, players going to the NFL draft and coaches and quarterback leaving, all that. We finally get to see this new-look Ole Miss team going against Mike Leach and everything that he can do on offense there for the Bulldogs. And then at 4 o'clock on the SEC Network, Georgia and Arkansas, of course, we'll all have an eye on that. Our biggest rivals in the SEC going against Florida's former quarterback in Felipe Franks. Very interesting. I think Georgia blows them out, but I will be interested to see, of course, Georgia's quarterback. It looks like DeJuan Mathis will be taking the lead role there at quarterback. So interesting quarterback storyline for both teams as, Florida will be really keyed in, kind of looking at Felipe Franks and what he looks like for the Razorbacks, and then of course what Georgia's doing. But their defense is going to be entirely way too much. I do like Arkansas's wide receivers. They have some pretty good wide receivers there to help Franks, but not enough, nowhere near enough to go against that Georgia Bulldog defense. And then the nightcaps here, Alabama will go to Missouri. Missouri's got a whole slew of players out for COVID reasons. That game wasn't going to be kind to Eli Drinkowitz anyway in his first game going against Alabama. So Alabama's going to pretty much slaughter Missouri. Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, not much in that game either. Maybe keep an eye on how Kellen Mond looks, but I think Texas A&M pretty much controls that game against Vanderbilt. And then I think the probably second best game as far as competitiveness. I think Kentucky-Auburn will be really good. But then the nightcap, 7:30, SEC Network, Tennessee, and South Carolina. And I think is a big statement for both coaches here, Jeremy Pruitt. Can he live up to some expectations for the first time in his career as being a head coach at Tennessee? Jarek Guarantano, I think, is the same thing. Some expectations on him to take that next step as an SEC quarterback. So can they, in their season opener, offensive line for Tennessee is going to be pretty strong. They do have to some key players, especially at receiver and on defense, to replace as well. So I think, it's a statement game for Jeremy Pruitt in that way of living up to expectations. But then for the other side of it, Will Muschamp changing offenses again. I do like the Mike Bobo hire, but man, how many times can he change offensive coordinators? We saw it at Florida. We're seeing it at South Carolina. It's the same story over and over again. I do think Mike Bobo is probably the best offensive coordinator hire he's made as a head coach. SEC experience. Did very well at Georgia as an offensive coordinator. I think it's the best hire he's made for that position. So, and he got some familiarity, knows Bobo well, being Georgia alumni together. So, but finally decided on quarterback, and we'll see how that goes for South Carolina. I think they have a whole lot of questions at wide receiver for that team as well, and we'll kind of just see how many steps and how quick can those steps be made for Will Muschamp and Mike Bobo in figuring out that South Carolina offense. So I think it's a statement game for both coaches. Jeremy Pruitt wins, and I think it just kind of it lets the expectations still linger a bit for Tennessee. Will Muschamp loses this game, then it's just like, oh, here we go again for South Carolina, more than likely. But win this game, and it's like, okay, then you're looking at a team that maybe not make a whole lot of noise in the SEC East, but many people were picking to finish behind Tennessee in the standings. And so South Carolina, Tennessee, both head coaches, a lot to prove there. And, of course, the in-state rivalry, not in the SEC, FSU and Miami will play as well. Miami coming off big win versus Louisville last weekend, and Mike Norvell, FSU head coach, is out with coronavirus. So interesting, his first Florida State Miami game, he will not be on the sideline. Oh, that's going to get ugly, I think. I do think Miami will pretty much control that game from kickoff. But, FSU ends up always playing Miami tough anyway. So let's see how that goes. But I do think Miami runs away with that game. So with this being the first preview, I think I never really threw out my season predictions. Usually throw those out around SEC Media Days. Didn't get a chance to do that this year, of course. So here we go. I got 9-1 for the Gators to finish out the year. 9-1. I think they do beat Georgia and drop a game somewhere else. I can't really pinpoint where I think Florida loses the game. I think it's kind of likely finishing 9-1. Maybe there's one loss comes to Kentucky or Tennessee at the end of the year. You roll into those last two games undefeated, and I can see a scenario where Florida loses those games. And look, this is not a hit on Florida. I don't think any SEC team is going undefeated this year. And it's been hard enough for a Florida team to go undefeated. and 10 SEC games, I just don't see it. I don't see anybody going undefeated. Look, the 2008 team didn't go undefeated. I wouldn't see a 96 team go undefeated. I wouldn't see an 06 team go undefeated with this schedule. So it's just the nature of the beast, I think. But, win that Georgia game, it still puts up everything for you. But I got Florida in winning the East And then Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Missouri, Vanderbilt. That's how I think the SEC wraps up. SEC West, I got Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and then Arkansas. And then the SEC Championship game, Florida and Alabama. I just can't pick Florida beating Alabama just yet. I'd love to be able to say they can. Look, a loss in that game still may get you to the college football playoff. The Big Ten coming back, and Ohio State, more than likely those teams will be still in the college football playoff conversation. We're only playing 8 games. I think that hampers a bit and maybe getting 2 SEC teams in. But we'll see how it all plays out. But I still think it's pretty likely 2 SEC teams get in. Florida's only got 1 loss going into that game. You still have a chance, even with a loss to Alabama, to get into the college football playoff. But that's kind of how I see it shaking out now. I hope I'm wrong with that. I hope Florida goes 10-0. I hope Florida's playing Alabama or whoever in Atlanta in the SEC championship game goes on to win that game and goes on to the college football playoff as well. So that will do it for this Ole Miss preview episode. Thanks for joining here. Don't forget, on Sunday, Nick De La Torre, Graham Hall would join me for a review of this game, and hopefully we'll be looking back at a Gators win. Guys and girls out there, I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.